So we'll continue in yet another formation, but it's still the same. Wonderful, Professor Huang.
Thanks. I hope I know that you are not completely exhausted because this is the third talk today. This is also the most preliminary work of mine among these three talks because, as I mentioned, the first paper was already done, published. The second paper is also done, under revision, but yeah, it's basically done. This is the one that I haven't really finished writing yet. Actually, when I was invited to give talks like in these three schools, like SOAS, Tübingen, and here, I had that romantic idea that by the time I came to give the talks, I would have finished the papers. But you know what? You guys are also in academics. The deadline that you presume that you are going to meet, you actually never met. Okay? So you never get to meet those deadlines you set for yourselves. So you usually finish the works if someone pushes you to finish, like demanding that paper from you. So anyway, this is the paper that has something to do with transitional justice. And I call it the politics of bronze statues because, for any country, I mean, especially I think in Asia, if you erect a bronze statue of someone, that means you pay respect, you pay tribute. And I mentioned earlier that I had 2 lines of activist works. I was involved for a long time for feminist movement in Taiwan. And then several years ago, I began to be involved in transitional justice in Taiwan. Several friends and we created a small civic organization that was called the Taiwan Association for Truth and Reconciliation. Because a lot of countries, especially what we call third wave democracies, third wave democracies mainly include like Spain, Portugal, from those Iberian countries, and then East Asia and Latin America and some of the African countries. Mainly, and Central and Eastern European countries that became democratized in late 80s and early 1990s. So the whole so-called third wave democracy include a huge range of countries. And many of these third wave democratic countries, they have had authoritarian past before. So transitional justice is a topic about how a newly democratized countries deal with the authoritarian past and to sort of like serve justice to people who were unjustly hurt and injured by the authoritarian state. So that was the activist work I was involved. And in the process of getting involved, there was one thing that I think was pretty interesting about the bronze statues, because some of you have been to Taiwan before. And even though Taiwan has democratized for almost 3 decades, up until this moment, in the central part of Taipei, in downtown Taipei, we still have a huge Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. And inside of that memorial hall, we still have a huge Chiang Kai-shek bronze statues there. Okay. So the question becomes like how the democratic countries coexist with the memories of a dictator. And when I started to think about that, because for all these years when I was doing research about gender, and in my earlier research career, I was also doing comparative studies of South Korea and Taiwan's labor militancy. So South Korea always served to me as an important reference point. So then I thought about South Korean experience, and then I thought, South Korean probably don't do that, because I don't remember seeing a lot of, say, like Pachonki statues when I was in South Korea. So I was curious about how South Korea handled that issue. Then, to my surprise, it turned out, which I'm going to share with you, is that while Taiwan is trying to remove the Chiang Kai-shek statues, South Korea in recent years are building Pachonki statues. I was like, what? So, it became a really surprising topic. And then I also starting to look at other countries' experience a little bit. So this is a project that I haven't really finished, so I can probably pick your brains today and help me to finish the paper. Let me talk about South Korea and Taiwan a little bit. Many of you have that basic knowledge. These two, Asian young democracies have very similar paths, like a parallel economic development and the democratization process. Both countries experience long-term authoritarian rules and democratize around the same time. Okay, South Korea began democratization in 1987, and Taiwan was also like that. And so why there was, like a different politics of brown statues, like Taiwan trying to remove it, and the South Koreans are building it. So especially, if we ask that questions in contrast to the record of transitional justice, because in general, South Korea is regarded as handling the transitional justice issue better than Taiwan, mainly because they have done a pretty comprehensive work about the Gwangju massacre that took place in 1980. And they also had a trace back to the 1940s, like the Jeju massacre, all this and that. So South Korea has done more. But in Taiwan, Taiwan's situation is different because in terms of transitional justice, Taiwan's record is very imbalanced. We have a pretty comprehensive scheme for compensation to the victims for both February 28th massacre and also the White Terror victims. And we also have preserved some historical sites. Like, nowadays if you go to Taiwan, for example, the small green island, Lüdao, used to imprison a lot of political dissents. Or, if you go to Jingmei, there is a human rights part. That jail used to imprison a lot of political dissents too. So we have done like a compensation, we have preserved a certain historical sites. And for monuments, we have monuments for both February 28th and also for White Terror. But in terms of other things, like the historical truths, February 28th, the government handled February 28th a little bit better, or much better. Because if you look at the way Taiwan memorialized February 28th, nowadays for February 28th, you have national holiday, you have national museum, and you have other probably like museums or cultural centers in local levels. And you also have, very importantly, you also have government issued official reports on February 28th. The first one was issued under the presidency of Li Denghui. That was in the early 1990s. And that was a work co-written by a Taiwanese historian and also American historian, Raymond Myers. And that official report was generally regarded as decent and fair. Then there was the second official report regarding February 28th that was published under the presidency of Chen Shui-bian. However, if you look at White Terror, up until today, the government had never issued any official report or official account on White Terror. And also in terms of Taiwan's popular consciousness, then you see the very simplistic view about how Taiwan became democratic countries, because the popular consciousness in Taiwan was like, after the war, the KMT camp killed a lot of people. That was February 28th. And then later, we had another democratic movement that was Formosa, Merida. Okay, the Formosa magazine protest in 1979. And then in 1987, we democratized, became a democratic country. So you have this very simplistic account. However, if you think about the authoritarian rule, this country was under authoritarian rule for about 4 decades. Between 1949, after the government declared the martial law, and 1987, after the government lifted the martial law. Throughout all these decades, because White Terror was like the systematic state violence, sort of like intruded upon individuals' lives. But for that part, up until today, Taiwanese people had very limited knowledge about what happened to us, during those decades. So that's about Taiwan's record of transitional justice. But under the current new government, recently transitional justice became a sort of like a popular term because after the DPP now control the majority of the parliament, so people do expect them to do a little bit more on this issue. Anyway, coming back to my sort of like a research. So if you look at the relation between authoritarianism and the bronze statues, you see a lot of countries have that experience. For example, Franco in Spain. Spain used to have Franco's statues in a lot of places. And you also have ex-socialist countries that they had like statues of Marx and especially Lenin, and or some other communist leaders or imposed symbols. And in Taiwan, you have Chiang Kai-shek. Not just in the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall in Taipei, but still in a lot of campus, like elementary school, junior high, senior high schools. Right after Taiwan democratized, some schools or some public parks removed a certain number of Chiang Kai-shek bronze statues. But up until today, there are still a lot of Chiang Kai-shek statues, sort of like scattered around the country. And in South Korea, as I said, in the old days, they didn't really have that many Pachonki statues. But nowadays, they started to build Pachonki statues, especially in Pachonki's home province, so which became a thorny issue for South Korea. Then, supposedly, if you look at the statues and you think that's the authoritarian symbols, then is there any explanation for these statues other than authoritarian symbols? Okay, so after the third wave of democracies, for example, in Spain, some people used to defend Franco as sort of like a tradition. This has been here for such a long time, and we just sort of like leave it there as this is just the tradition, and why should we, sort of like get rid of everything just because we now have a new political system? And in Germany, I think it's pretty interesting because right after Germany was unified in early 1990s, there was the discussion about how the new country was to deal with all these Lenin statues in the previous East Germany. And for a while, people were sort of like debating about whether they should remove all the Lenin statues, mainly because some of the Lenin statues in the Eastern Germany, in the former Eastern Germany, was actually commissioned work done by very famous artists. So, that wouldn't be a surprise, right? And so some people say, these bronze statues, they should probably be kept because they are works of very famous artists. For artistic value, we should probably keep them. And for South Korea, it was pretty interesting because recently, a few years ago, the KIST is Korean Institute of Science and Technology. It's a think tank, basically sponsored by government and also private industry money. Pa Zhong-hee was the creator of the KIST during, when he was the president of South Korea. So KIST, a few years ago, actually erected a Pa Zhong-hee statue in the yard of their, institute. So it was not like they erected a statue outside of the KIST building. But then there was protest against the KIST decision to erect a Pa Zhong-hee bronze statue. So the KIST defense was that we are not memorialize a dictator. We are trying to keep a memory of our founder. And we are not erecting a bronze statue in front of your gate. We are erecting a statue within our yard. So who gave you the rights to protest against our decision? So that was the defense of the KIST. And for Taiwan, for Chiang Kai-shek bronze statues, some people always argue that yes, he is a dictator, we know that, but he has other important contributions, like something like fighting against Japanese. That's a very important contribution. Or, for years, Chiang Kai-shek is regarded as some kind of national savior, even though nowadays I don't think Taiwanese people look at him in such a, with such a perspective. But then there was also this argument that he's a complicated historical figure. He has other contributions other than, he being a dictator. So, so then there was this discussion about whether all these, bronze statues, they were still there or they were newly built because there was authoritarian nostalgia. Some of the scholarly work were pretty interesting. For example, in Asia, if you look at the survey attitude, this work was published a few years ago. If you look at the survey attitude, the survey results, the attitude results, then South Korea and Taiwan was less support for democracy. That was the survey done in mid-2000s. However, while these two countries were less support for democracy, they were also more detached from authoritarianism. So they were less support. They were a little bit skeptical about democracy, but they were not really embracing authoritarianism. And one of the most recent work, it was published earlier this year by a Korean scholar, and he argued that in South Korea, there was Pachonki nostalgia for truth, because there was survey data showing that. However, the Pachonki nostalgia does not mean South Koreans want to go back to authoritarianism, or does not mean they are supporting authoritarianism. So if it was not about authoritarian nostalgia, then what was the politics of bronze statues about? And in this paper, I sort of haven't finished yet, I argued that it usually comes with it usually has something to do with these three things. It was about national and ethnic identity struggle. It was about local tourism and the economy. And it was also about democratic struggle. Okay, and I'm going to, show you one after the other. For the national and the ethnic identity issue, you see that in a lot of countries. For example, Ukraine. There was the Euromaidan and the Lenin statues. I'm going to show you the picture because within a few years, Ukraine has removed all the Lenin statues. For Germany, after that initial debate about artistic value, they eventually decided to remove all Lenin statues. So nowadays in Germany, you don't see Lenin statues anymore. In West part, of course, but even if you go to the former Eastern Germany part, you don't see that. Estonia, like an ex-socialist country, is also pretty interesting. They have this great controversy regarding the bronze soldiers of Talent, because that soldier, I'm going to show you the picture very soon, and there was that bronze statues for years was under the Soviet rule, was regarded as some sort of Soviet liberation of Estonia. Like the end of the World War II. However, from the Estonian perspective, it actually symbolized the Soviet invasion, like the Soviet dominance of Estonia. So, there was the relocation and the rename of that bronze soldiers. And in Taiwan, in recent years, you will see removal and the desecration of Chiang Kai-shek statues taking place in a lot of locations. And but the most interesting case about the national and ethnic identity struggle actually has something to do with the destruction of Sun Yat-sen statue. Because Sun Yat-sen actually has never ruled Taiwan. Yeah. He passed away in 1924. He passed away in 1925. And when he passed away, Taiwan is still a colony of Japan. So he had nothing to do with ruling Taiwan. But then his statue was also, sort of torn down, mainly because he is still the national founder of the Republic of China. So destroying his statue mainly because people want to kick Republic of China out of Taiwan. So that really is about the national and the ethnic identity issue. So these are the pictures. See. This is actually a famous picture online. You can easily get it. The Ukraine complete its plan to remove all these Lenin statues. Okay, that's quite a bit, right? Okay, and then this is the Estonian. Okay, see, for this statue, this one was in sort of like a downtown Tallinn. Okay, it's an old location. And after all these debates and the controversy, the government moved it to a suburban area to move it into a different place. So it was originally in the park, like a central area of Taiwan, and then the government moved it to relocated the statue. But even after the statue was relocated, you would still see like a desecration because people still hated it, and people still think that it symbolized the Soviet invasion and dominance. Now the picture of Taiwan, which is kind of funny. Like a national father also needs justice for residents. Like, what is the point of a statue needs residents? Okay, and this took place in Tainan. Okay, in the southern city of Taiwan, and which now in recent years has become a stronghold for the DPP. Okay. And this took place in a park that's formally called Zhongshan Gongyuan. Zhongshan is San Yat-sen's name in Chinese. It was the park was named Zhongshan Gongyuan. But then, Tainan city government changed that name to Tangdezhang Gongyuan. Tangdezhang was a victim of February 28th. Okay, and he was also a Tainan person. And in this previously known as Zhongshan Gongyuan, there was this San Yat-sen statue, because this is the famous line of San Yat-sen, like 天下为公孙文. So the Tainan city government erected a Tangdezhang bronze statue in a different part of the park, and renamed the park as Tangdezhang Gongyuan. And then the Tainan city government basically said, let's try to bypass that issue. So they basically said like the base of this statue became a little bit unstable, so it would pose danger to passersby. So they would try to remove the statue for the time being to make sure that nobody got hurt if something happened to the statue. Okay. Or if something happened to the statue, that means if the statue fell down and hurt some, people there. So after Tainan city government announced that they would do that, suddenly the KMT Tainan council persons all showed up and protest against the Tainan city government's decision. So that's why they have this banner. That means do not remove him because he needs justice for residents. Because 居住正义 has become such a popular term. Yeah. Because in the recent, like the land taking, land grabbing cases, like the government forced people to move from their home. Okay, so they just say national founding father also needs the justice for residents, and this was the KMT politicians came out to protest. But what happened next? Pro-independence force, because after the KMT politicians protested, then the Tainan government suspended the plan to move the statue. So the Tainan city government said, okay, they would wait for a little while. But then the pro-independence force couldn't wait. So some people just during like one early morning, like around midnight, went to, sort of like basically they went to tear down the statue. Okay. And if you look at the statue, the most important slogan is this: ROC out. So it had nothing to do with, it was about national identity struggle. Basically say, Republic of China do not belong here. And the national identity thing, this is a desecration of Chiang Kai-shek statue. See, they put a flag, Taiwan Du Li. I'm a Taiwanese, I stand for Taiwan's independence. Then there is another picture here. It's also about the desecration of Chiang Kai-shek statue in some parts. And look at the slogan they put it here, 解殖建国. That means decolonize and creating, establishing a new nation. And 破华立台, abolish Chineseness and establish Taiwaneseness. That's their slogan. So you see, this is a very clear, like a national struggle, identity struggle. But along with the identity struggle, there are democratic struggle. Democratic struggle means the discourse is not necessarily about nation building or national identity. It's more about democratic value. If you look at the Spain's situation is pretty interesting in the sense that within political science, especially for what we call comparative politics scholars, we all know very well about the Spanish case because Portugal and Spain are regarded as the first wave of the countries that got democratized within the so-called third wave democracies because they began democratization in mid-1970s. And however, for Spain, at the initial period of democratization, the democratic force had sort of like a silent pact with the authoritarian government that they would not deal with the past. We need a democracy now, let's move on. Let's not talk about the past now. Mainly because, Spain came out of the Civil War in 1930s, and there were, people who support a Republican government, and there were people who support Franco. And that was right after Franco passed away, and there were still people who believed in Franco was the great man and who respected Franco. So anyway, in 1975, when Spain democratized, there was this sort of like unwritten silent pact between the former authoritarian government, authoritarian elites, and the democratic force that they would not deal with the past. However, 30 years later, young generation Spanish did not agree with that. So in 2007, Spain passed the law called the spiritual law. And according to that law, all Franco statues and symbols are prohibited to be displayed in any public place in Spain anymore. So like on the streets, you wouldn't see the Franco statues anymore. And any public establishments like museums, schools, and all other public buildings could not be named after Franco. Okay, that was their spiritual law. And in Taiwan, of course, the Chiang Kai-shek statues also involved. The desecration of Chiang Kai-shek statues also involved the democratic struggle. And I will show you the pictures about the slogans we put on the desecrated statue. And in South Korea, Pachonki statues in his and the North Gyeongsang province. North Gyeongsang province is the northeastern part of South Korea, which that area is where Pachonki came from, his hometown. So there were also people protesting against the statues erected there, mainly because of they discussed and sort of like based their protest on democratic values. And also in ex-socialist countries, Hungary had this German occupation memorial, which was the most recent controversy in Hungary. Because you are all nodding, so obviously you have followed that news, in Budapest, and they tried to create a German occupation memorial, but Hungary also had divided memories over German occupation, so some people were really upset about that memorial. So this is the picture of Spain. This is the last Franco statue removed in Spain. And see, these kind of coins would no longer exist. It was issued in 1950s. So you will see like Franco was on the coins. But nowadays, if you go to Spain, you don't see that kind of coins anymore. For Chiang Kai-shek, see, these are two pictures. For this one, they sort of like desecrated the Chiang Kai-shek statues. However, if you look at the slogans they put on, it was about democracy. It had nothing to do with ROC, get out of here, or, I support Taiwanese. It was about, the party state authority, get out of campus. And so it also said authoritarian legacy, why should we, keep that? And 和煦缅怀. And then it just say, 杀人魔, the killing monster, Chiang Kai-shek, get out of the campus. And, basically this was about if there was no resolution, then there was no forgiveness. And this part, this is also another Chiang Kai-shek statue got desecrated. And all these A4 paper, each of them contained a brief biography of white terror victims or February 28th victim. So it was the discourse of this kind of desecration was about democratic structure. This is the Pachonki statue, and this basically means the unraveling ceremony of President Pachonki. See, this is a huge bronze statue. Here is the current president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, his daughter. But this picture was taken quite a few years ago. That was before she became the president. At that time, she was a parliamentary member. And so for when this ceremony was, going on, there was protest, nearby, but they didn't take it. And this is the Hungary German occupation memorial. So see, there were also people putting all these slogans, and I do not know any of you read Hungarian. Oh, so
Yes.
yeah.
I only recognize 2 words. Sorry.
And from the descriptions of these pictures,
Like, 13 means history, and Kurtmiergazish, I think it means like rage or something, and
yeah, like outraged by this, something like that, according to the description of, and there were people who also had all these protests, because they have different interpretations about the German occupation memorial. The people who supported it basically say this is to memorialize that sad part of the history that when Hungary was occupied by Germany. But then there were people who protest, basically say you guys have no rights to erect such sort of like a memorial because you guys never apologized for what you did during the occupation period, and you were collaborators of German, those German occupiers, and then nowadays you erect such a memorial to sort of like cleanse your own past guilt or something. So that was the controversy. The third line was about local tourism. It was pretty interesting because nowadays in Taiwan, those people who go to see Chiang Kai-shek memorials are Chinese tourists. Out of curiosity. Yeah, from China. Okay. And the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial, the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial in downtown Taipei, and also there is a Chiang Kai-shek Statues Park. The Statues Park were not for newly created statues. It was, created right after democratization because at that time, a lot of places removed the Chiang Kai-shek statues. So that park in Taoyuan County, they just received and let that park become a Chiang Kai-shek statue park. And for South Korea, they used the line to defend the Pachongi Memorial because they think it boosted the hometown economy. The Pachongi birthplace, for example, the North Gyeongsang province has renovated the birthplace of Pachongi, like a small sort of like hash hut. And then, there were like tourists came by and took a look, something like that. Hungary also had a memento parks. I will show you the picture. Like all these formal statues were put in that parks and became a tourist spot. The most amazing thing when I was doing the research was, in Italy, in Mussolini's hometown, the mayor actually was a socialist mayor, and he was trying to build a Mussolini, the museum for Mussolini. And I was like, what? You are a socialist mayor and you are trying to build a museum for Mussolini. And the defense and the line was that, Mussolini is a historical figure. People are curious about his life stories. I mean, he was actually trying to use the line of local tourism and the local economy because he thought it was helpful for local economy. These are the pictures. See? The Chiang Kai-shek, all kinds of statues. Some people put these cartoon characters. Wasted Chiang Kai-shek statues. I have no idea why they did that. It was, kind of weird. I had no idea whether they put those cartoon, characters there to sort of like soften the image of an authoritarian ruler or to ridicule the authoritarian ruler. Okay.
Or to protect.
To protect?
Because I think like
they're guards.
Power.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's how these cartoon statues, cartoon characters were.
They would function as bodyguards.
Okay, this is from different angle. So you see how big, how large the park is, and how many statues are there all over. All these statues. Now becomes it's close to Tsuhu. Yeah, but not exactly in Tsuhu. It's close by. Yeah, it's close to the Chiang Kai-shek's burial site
Yeah.
in Taiwan. Yeah. These are the Hungarian memento parks. And then, someone also did sort of like a Photoshop, also did a cartoon figure. So obviously, these kind of statues attract people's attention. Some people want to, put cartoon characters there. Yeah, but these were all from communist days. Okay. So the first question is now, like, is there a possibility for accommodating all this? Like, is it possible for these statues of dictator to coexist with democracy? Okay. And the question that I want to raise that if some kind of coexistence is quote unquote necessary or unavoidable, then there are still issues about under what conditions and for how long we have to allow these statues to be there. And I think there are at least two lines of issues that have to be raised. One is about whether these statues are occupied or located in public or private space, and whether there are public money or private money involved, like the funding. So if you look at Taiwan, the government budget per year, they spend 10 to 12 million US dollars per year for Chiang Kai-shek Memorial. That's a huge amount of money. But of course, the current Chiang Kai-shek Memorial maintenance people argue that after all these income from tourism, the real money spent on the for the maintaining or keeping Chiang Kai-shek Memorial is about probably 3 to 4 million US dollars. It greatly sort of like offset the cost. But then 3 to 4 million US dollars is still quite a bit of money. And for Chiang Kai-shek and the Jiang Jingguo burial site park, the government spent about 2 million US dollars per year to maintain that. For South Korea, there is a mix of public and private funding. But according to one media estimate, between 2008 and 2013, this is the period under President Lee Myung-bak. Okay, the conservative president before President Park Geun-hye, before Park Chung-hee's daughter. So during his presidency, it's a huge amount of money. There were about 130 million US dollars government funding for various kinds of Park Chung-hee memorial activities or buildings. For Chile has also pretty interesting example. They have the public and the private funding for different memorials. So, for example, in Chile, Chile's capital Santiago, you would see this very famous Museum of Human Rights. And these are all the victims' pictures. This is a pretty famous sort of like installation arts, like when you got into the museum. However, not too far away, also in the capital city of Santiago, you will see Pinochet's foundation. Okay, this Pinochet's foundation was in his private residence. So there were private money coming in to convert his formal residence into a museum and a foundation. So you will see all these, display. I mean, with this kind of design or sort of the way they display all these badges, it was obviously not about how people should remember the history. It was about paying tribute to him as an accomplished person or even a great man. Now I'm going to show you a very interesting picture. Who's this guy? Kim Il-sung. Yeah. This is Kim Il-sung, right? This is the famous Kim Il-sung gigantic bronze statue in North Korea. Okay. In the old days, nowadays I don't know if they do that anymore. But in the old days, whoever whoever visited North Korea, the first stop is here. They have to they have to pay tribute to the Kim Il-sung bronze statue first. And then they can start their itineraries. Okay. This is this is the picture of the Park Chung-hee bronze statue. See the similarities? This is when the Park Chung-hee home province tried to build the Park Chung-hee bronze statues. So they openly called for the designs, and this was the award-winning design. So when they released the picture, it completely outraged a lot of the South Koreans. So they were like, are you crazy? Don't you see the difference between, don't you see the similarities between this one and the North Korean Kim Il-sung one? Which was crazy, right? So, eventually what they did was they put the arm down. So that was like, oh, wait, let me show you the previous picture. Remember this picture that they had so that was, but they eventually built it. They put the arm down holding a book, after, there was protest and criticism. So eventually, that's how they built it. And let me show you okay, these are now these are how Pachonki memorial activities. This is basically sort of like a donation request pamphlets. And basically say the President Pachonki's bronze statue establishing fund. Like, they ask people to donate money so they can erect Pachonki bronze statues. And this is a private, foundation and Pachonki's family picture. And this is probably the most famous Pachonki memorial line. You all read, some of you all read the Chinese, but in Korean, that means my whole life is for the nation and my mother country. And this has been sort of like printed on like vase and a plaque and all kinds of Pachonki mementos now in the Pachonki Memorial Library. This is Park Geun-hye. That was also when she was a parliamentary member. She went to all these ceremonies memorialized her father. And this is the newly built, just opened several years ago in suburban Seoul. This is the Pachonki Memorial Museum and the Memorial Library. And this is the most famous line of Pachonki. Oh, okay, they have English because I was going to translate it for you. That basically means, yes, we can do. That means in the high time of the 1970s when he tried to mobilize the spirits of South Korea and to sort of like go through all these heavy industrialization, since the early 70s. So these are the Pachonki, Memorial Library and the museum. It was interesting because I visited this place 2 years ago when I was in Korea doing research. And it was on my last day of my research trip because I was so tied up with all these interview schedule. And this memorial museum was actually in the sort of a little bit outskirts of the Seoul city. So I took the wrong bus. So by the time I arrived at the museum, it was like 15 minutes before the closing time. So I rushed into the museum, but I really wanted to take a look because I'm leaving early next morning. And since I was already there, so I told one of the persons, because I can understand some of the Koreans, but my Korean is not fluent enough for me to do like real discussion. So I explained to that person in English that I say, I'm really, really sorry, but I'm from Taiwan, and I know it's about your closing time, and I really want to take a look at this museum. And that was, the man that I talked to was like a middle-aged to old-age male. And I suddenly saw him like turn around his head, in a sort of like a mildly excited tone to tell his co-workers that this person is from Taiwan and he came all the way to pay tribute to our president. so I really, I could understand that Korean. So he said something like, I really need to bring her to take a quick look. So we are closing late, just wait for me. And I feel kind of awkward and a little bit embarrassed. And also a little bit guilty, It was like, well, I'm not exactly paying tribute or respect to him. But anyway, so he brought me to have a short, brief, quick tour. So by the time I left, it was like probably like 15, 20 minutes after the closing time. And he sort of like walked me to the gate and still, explaining to me like, he was very happy that as a Taiwanese, I came all the way, and he felt encouraged that the president, people from Taiwan, also realized the president was a great person, and he felt really bad that nowadays South Korean young people people were, their impression or memories of the president was all distorted by these, bad politicians. They didn't have the correct, historical understanding. And I was like, I really felt awkward. I just keep thanking him for showing me around. So you do see the divided languages. You see those people. You do see some people are true believers, supporters, or they truly respect that authoritarian figure. So the conclusion is how transitional is transitional justice? Okay, democratization, of course, is a never-ending process. Okay. You can look at a country and say, okay, now it's over. It's okay. We are fine. We are a democracy now. Just look at the United States. They could produce a candidate like a Donald Trump. So I do think, I hope I'm not offending anyone here, but since I suppose none of you is U.S. citizen anyway. I think that shows a lot about the let me stop talking about Donald Trump. But anyway, democratization is a never-ending process. And when we talk about the past, we usually talk about the past that has current significance. Because if it's a statute about someone who lived 200 years ago, nobody really, gives a damn about it. Just like, okay, who is this person? But because all these Chang-Ling statutes still have current significance in Taiwan, because it really challenged the Taiwan as a democratic society. Like, how are we looking at this issue? And also, if you look at the recent racial struggles in South Africa and the United States, you do see the past will haunt you if you do not resolve that issues. I think in South Africa, like the University of Cape Town, they actually moved Rhodes. Rhodes Scholarship up until today is still like one of the most prestigious, fellowship across, I think, the Atlantic Oceans. But, University of Cape Town students basically protested and say Rhodes as these, slave owners, all this and that. And, Rhodes basically was the creator, founder of that university. But then they moved his statue from the front gate, like the front stairs of the University of Cape Town. And if you look at what has been taking place in Yale, in some other prestigious universities in United States now, they are like renaming, and the students demand to rename some of the buildings, because all those buildings were named after someone, and that someone most likely happened to be slave owners, because they live in 18th century or 19th century, when the United States was basically a slave-owning, economy. And I think that reflected the current racial relation in the United States. So students felt that this has to be, dealt with. Coming back to take a look at Taiwan, I think Chiang Kai-shek, to some extent, even though we still have these statutes to talk about, to discuss, but it is a fading issue, because I think not many people in Taiwan, like extremely few people in Taiwan, still sort of like respect him or try to keep his memories. But not the memory of Jiang Jingguo. Jiang Jingguo posed a bigger challenge to the Taiwanese democracy. Mainly because, first of all, Jiang Jingguo doesn't have any statues. You don't have his statues to remove. However, on the other hand, the memory of Jiang Jingguo up until today tends to be positive among quite a few Taiwanese people. Especially if you look at some of the politicians in Taiwan, they would still incur the memories of Jiang Jingguo. They would still talk about Jiang Jingguo in a positive way. Okay, so that I think that is a bigger challenge. And for Pa Zhonghe memory, I think it remains a challenge in South Korea. I don't know whether that would become a fading issue after Pa Zhonghe, stepped down as the president. I don't know. But if you look at the North Gyeongsang province, and especially Pa Zhonghe's hometown, which is a town called Gumi, in the past 10 years, they have done quite a bit of Pa Zhonghe memorials. They named Pa Zhonghe. For example, Pa Zhonghe, under his high time of authoritarian rule, there was the New Village movement. So in the North Gyeongsang province and in his hometown, Gumi, they actually had a park called New Village Park. That was a newly created science park, and they named it as New Village Park. Always try to, sort of like raise the memories of Pajong Diru. So I think that still remains a challenge. So I'll stop here.
This is very touching to me because I work on Mao and Gandhi statues, and not just statues, but in doing visualizations. And, we just had a discussion with Jeffrey Alexander, a sociologist in Yale, who's also working on sort of performances of politics. And of course, statues play a very, very important role in that. And I had to discuss what he was doing, and then in this, working for this discussion, I found out that there is a statue of Martin Luther King, who he was talking about, and that's actually built by a Chinese, who also is very much involved in building or creating statues of Mao, of course.
Wow, that's interesting.
Context. And so there was this huge uproar, actually, in the US after, first of all, because he's in white granite, so why would a black man be done in white granite, a statue of a black man? And then he's done by a Chinese, and he's done by someone who is specialized in doing dictators. So this is just to say that it's not just dictators, it's all kinds of politicians that are being cast into statue form, not necessarily bronze, but also other materials. And maybe, one could also sort of take this angle and think about what statues as such say about the statue of that particular person, and what that actually says about political systems as such. And whether dictatorships are really so different from democracies in there with regard to creating a statue by creating statues. So, so this, thank you very much. To me, that was really eye-opening because I didn't know much about many of the statues that we talked about. I don't really want to formulate a question except the one that do we have to just think in terms of dictatorships or South Korea? How do we deal with this? Because your talk was really framed within this transitional justice idea, and I wonder whether that does even transitional justice to the topic you're approaching. So anyway, so the question would be, yes, go ahead.
I also have a question about statues because I wondered why almost all the past and the current dictators or socialists are so obsessed with statues. Where did this kind of fashion or culture come from? I think it would be very interesting to think about it. And my second question is, do you think maybe especially in the case of Taiwan and South Korea, do you think maybe the descendants and also the spouse of the dictators also play a very important role in reserving this kind of memorial of dictators? Because the son of Chiang Kai-shek became the president. Afterwards, same happened in South Korea. Also, Madam Chiang Kai-shek also is very popular, have a very positive image in, as far as I know, in mainland China as well. People like her. So do you think maybe this kind of people's favor of their descendants and spouse as a political figure kind of moderate people's negative feelings about dictators?
Well, I think for the first question that Barbara raised, I think it's a pretty interesting and challenging question. To be honest, I have no clear answer at this moment, but I tend to agree with you because the bronze statues probably have very similar meanings under dictatorship and democracy. However, if they are democratic figures, I think there were less controversies because basically, I think democracy produces legitimacy. Even if you don't like that person, if you don't vote for that person, and if someone wants to erect a statue of democratically elected politicians, people tend to leave that alone. But for dictators, that was always a debate, because it was all these symbols of authoritarian past. So it became even more difficult challenges. When I was giving this talk in London, in SOAS, someone asked me whether I wanted to see these, I personally wanted to see these statues to be removed all. And I basically admitted that I would like to see them be removed all. But in terms of being an activist or try to persuade people, I think, for a democratic society, I would rather like to see more debates and discussions and leave rooms for people to decide whether they want to remove the statues in the parks nearby their residence, whether they want to remove the statues in their own on their own campus, instead of like the government sort of like now declare the policy that all these statues should be gone like overnight. Because I think what is important for democratic society is that you need to talk, you need to discuss what's the meaning of these statues. If someone can come up with a persuasive argument like we should keep these statues in a certain way, because that could benefit the community, that could hold the community together, or that could allow the community to grow even more, and I'm fine with that. I don't think because the top-down approach, it should not really be used all the time, especially in a democracy. Yeah. So my personal preference is one thing, but whether that is the best solution, I don't think so. I would like to see people agree that we should remove them. But then if people do have different ideas, and if the community that they belong to can come up with some creative way to look at this issue, and then they have more discussions and deliberations over this issue, I think that's probably even better. And going back to the descendants, I think Zhang family descendants are basically gone from Taiwan's political scene. And there is only one politician currently active who has connections to the Zhang family. He is the son of Jiang Jingguo's illegitimate son. Okay. Yeah, Zhang Wanwan, the recently elected parliamentary member and a new parliamentary member. But all the Jiang family descendants, they have all, and I don't think any of them could probably come into the political scene and become politician again. And what's going to happen to Jiang Wanwan, he's the son of Chiang Kai-shek's illegitimate son. But but everybody knows his father is, Chiang Kai-shek's son. So, and
which son?
Jiang Xiaoyan.
Jiang Xiaoyan. Yeah, their mother is Zhang Yaro. And what will be the political future of Jiang Wanwan? Nobody knows, because he is just a newly elected member of parliament now, so it's hard to say. So for the descendants, and Taiwanese actually, in terms of the popular consciousness now, it's very, very hard to assess how do they feel about Madame Chiang Kai-shek, because to most of the contemporary Taiwanese, that was the past, And also, she left Taiwan after Taiwan became democratic, and she eventually passed away in New York, when she was really old. So it was sort of like a vague memory for contemporary Taiwanese. Michael?
Oh, yes. I have two questions. First, thank you for your talk. My first question is, statues are obviously a very obvious symbol of authoritarian rule, and it's a very clear source of conflict or a fair point between this issue of transitional justice. Are there any maybe more subtle or less obvious points that there are also conflicts between this framework of authoritarian rule and democracy? So that's the first question. Second question is sort of addressed the global context. Is there anything about Taiwan's case that makes them sort of unique, that gives them different challenges or perspectives when approaching this topic?
The second question first. I think Taiwan, up until today, is a little bit unique in the sense that we have we have had an authoritarian party that ruled Taiwan for decades, under authoritarian rule, but they still could win democratic elections after the country democratized. So, you really have to be amazed by the resilience of the Nationalist Party, because they are probably, one of the longest survived authoritarian party in third wave democracies. Because if you look at the countries that experienced third wave democracies, you would still see like old conservative guards winning democratic elections, but then they would change their name. They would just try to create new parties under new names. But the KMT, the Chinese Nationalist Party, up until today, is still very active, even though they lost the majority of the parliament, but they are still very active in Taiwan's politics. So that's kind of a little bit unique, I would say. And also, what is interesting about Taiwan's case in terms of putting under the framework of transitional justice is that Taiwan's situation is like we handle the transitional justice in such a way that some part is comprehensively done, like compensation. So it created a general atmosphere among ordinary citizens, like what's more to talk about? You guys want to talk about this mainly because you guys are trying to manipulate, other people. You guys are using these as political instruments, because didn't we already, compensate the victims and the victims' family members? So what else do they want? That kind of things. But in recent years, I think nowadays things changed a little bit. So I would say it became a little bit better because people started to realize that there was still a lot of things that we didn't know and we didn't realize, and that the government does owe us an explanation about what happened before, what exactly the government has done to ordinary citizens during those decades of authoritarian rule. So that was, I think, the part about Taiwan. And about the first question is about other than statutes, were they?
So, for example, in Taiwan, what are some less obvious sources of conflict?
Less obvious sources of conflict. Well, Taiwan's conflicts are always very obvious, like identity clash, or pro-unification or independence, or these statutes. Yeah. Okay. And then talking about the unique part about Taiwan is that you don't see that many democratically elected politicians competing against each other to be the true heir of a dictator. That I would say is quite unique about Taiwan, which is Jiang Jingguo. I always use Li Denghui as an example. A lot of people regard Li Denghui as like the father of Taiwan's democracy. However, if you look at Li Denghui carefully, he has repeatedly said, up until very recently, he has repeatedly said that he was the best student of Jiang Jingguo's school, and he was the best graduate of Jiang Jingguo's school. And up until early last year, when he was interviewed by a Hong Kong magazine, he basically said that without Jiang Jingguo and without me, Taiwan wouldn't have democracy. You read this line and you were completely, to me, I was like a little bit stunned, because if he said without me, Taiwan had no democracy, I could understand. But then he said without Jiang Jingguo and without me, Taiwan wouldn't have democracy. So you see, he still, and then, when he when he openly criticized some of the KMT politicians, he basically said these people do not deserve, have no qualification to claim that they are the heirs of Jiang Jingguo. And I was like, what? And among the KMT politicians, among like Ma Ying-jeou, Song Chu-yu, James Song, Ma Ying-jeou, and some other, for example, the current KMT chairperson, Hong Xiu-zhu, they at some points of their political careers, they were sort of like criticizing one another about not being the true heirs of Jiang Jingguo. So that's kind of unique, right? You have democratic countries and all these democratically elected politicians competing against one another, like about who was the true heir of a dictator. That's kind of weird. So in my opinion, that also shows how transitional justice hadn't been handled well. Yeah, supposedly if we did a better job in that aspect, I don't think that should be the case in Taiwan. Yeah.
Okay, the next one will be Chen.
Yeah, I want to pick up the discussion about the communicative process of whether to remove those statues or not. So of course I can imagine that a lot of groups will have different opinions in this discussion, and then probably I don't think a consensus would be reached by a majority of people. Then within the framework of transitional justice, should the victims groups or the groups that represent the victims have more say when no obvious consensus can be reached between different groups? Should they be given more naming power or decisional power within the idea of transitional justice?
I do think so, and I think that's basically what the current atmosphere in Taiwan is. Yeah, but the problem is there hasn't been enough talks about how we're going to deal with Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, because it's right there. It's a huge building in downtown Taipei, and I think the DPP government move it. I think the DPP government is very careful about not alienating too much of people who, I'm not sure whether they are still supporting it, but who just think just leave it there, So there are all kinds of discussions about how are we going to do with that. Yeah. So I do think the victims groups or the victim supporting groups should probably have more say, but I think that could also come out. That could also come out of the process. Yeah.
But that's isn't that very dangerous? Think about it. Yesterday, Nanjing massacre now also has memorials and everything, but then Changchun doesn't have memorial. So what can we do? Anyway,
Yeah, I have a question about transitional justice. And you said that the transitional justice is about living memories. Like if the past is significant, then it's more relevant. But I remember that there's some in the States there's some people, including Native Americans, says we should change Columbus Day to some other days because Columbus, of course. And I support that, but initially, and then I thought but there's a lot of places in America for Columbus, even a country called Colombia. So it's if we want to have a transitional justice, how can, where's the end? How can we do it in a broader sense, or how can we go on?
I think where is the end actually should come within the community. Yeah. So, for example, if it's a park, then you have residents of that area to discuss. If it's a statue on campus, you have students and the faculty members to discuss that. And I kind of feel that the end should be a dynamic thing. For example, one of the examples that I always like to cite is in one of the indigenous, in one of the elementary school in the indigenous area in Taiwan. Because in the old days, there are all these Chiang Kai-shek, bronze statues just erected there right in the front gate of a school, right? So in that, elementary school, the school principal himself is an indigenous person. And he didn't remove the Chiang Kai-shek statue because there are all these statues, and some of the statues were made in such a way that it didn't look very much like Chiang Kai-shek. but everybody sort of knew that was supposed to be Chiang Kai-shek, statue. That was how authoritarianism was, right? So they didn't remove that statue, but in recent years, that school principal, he just suddenly, I think he just had that statue. Well, he put on some indigenous clothes, traditional clothes, on the statue. So a lot of people who came to that school thought that statue was actually Mona Lu. That was the indigenous hero fighting against Japanese, during the colonial time. So everybody sort of just assumed, oh, so they had a statue of Mona Lu. And I was like, well, that's actually a pretty creative way to handle this, right? So I guess, the so-called end really depends on, really should be a dynamic thing, and really depends on the community and some creativity. And some people basically said that perhaps we should not remove all these statues because in recent years, especially young students, all these desecrations were done by young people. A lot of them, college students, high school students, if they still see, gigantic statues on their campus in their nearby parks, they just, went to do it, especially around February 28th. Yeah, because that was, important Memorial Day. So what happened was some people, I think in one of my previous lectures, I don't remember, it was in SOAS or in Dunedin, some people mentioned that whether we should just leave the statues and, let people's creativity to, handle these statues. And I had no problem with that either, because if some people thought that let's have a memorial service like every year that we sort of like desecrate the Chiang-Kai-shek statue in a different way to remind us about a certain part of the history. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I just got one question about this kind of democratization process because I think it's quite true that this kind of process root of South Korea and Taiwan are quite similar. But I just got one question because it's also very similar in that point. Like under Park-Chung-hee's rule, the Korean people just reach this kind of miracle of Hanjang, this kind of economic booming.
Yes.
Yes. So Park-Chung-hee basically they just treated their people as kind of army and industrial warriors. Mm-hmm. And but on the other hand, I just think during this process, that a huge violation of human rights. And but do you think it's kind of an inevitable process to reach democratization? Because I mean, if there was not this kind of military government of Park-Chung-hee, how can South Korea, this country was earlier such a weak and really backward country, can reach such a great achievement within that short period? Do you think it's kind of inevitable process to experience this kind of dictatorship? Because I don't know Taiwanese case very well, but I think maybe under Chiang-Kai-shek, the authoritarian rule, also kind of economic booming also appeared as well. So, right?
Well, I always have my suspicion about that kind of argument, like authoritarian rule was inevitable, because the price that we pay for authoritarian rule was too huge. And for those people who argue that authoritarian rule was an inevitable thing to achieve economic success, I always challenge them that what about if you are the victims of the authoritarian rules? Do you still think that is inevitable? When people talk about that and adopt that line of thinking, they are always assuming that other people are paying for the price of authoritarian rule, and they are the ones who benefit from the economic development, which I think fit the scenarios of the majority of South Koreans and the Taiwanese, because a lot of people do enjoy the economic benefits, and then there is this small number of people whose lives are destroyed, their families are destroyed, and they were killed or imprisoned for a long time. Yeah. So I think I have huge reservations about that line of argument, and we also do not have enough country examples to prove whether that line is true or false, right? So I think that's something. I think if you want to go to adopt that kind of argument, I think it should be very, very careful. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Germany in the 1950s is not a dictatorship, and it creates divisions. So I think economic success and dictatorship has nothing to do with each other. The GDR GDR goes into bankruptcy basically under a dictatorship, and so does the Soviet Union. So I mean, really, and Mao is China, right? So there are all kinds of counterexamples, I think, for that connect. That
For example, you cannot follow something from examples. I mean, Singapore is a good example for dictatorship.
Yes. I mean, all I was trying to say is that exactly, So it's not always like that.
Question, because in Germany's case, I don't know that quite well. In the 50s, maybe the economic basis is better than in South Korea.
Everything was destroyed.
Yeah, everything was destroyed.
It was after World War II, so I mean that's a good way to start the economy, of course, but it's also very tough. So I
think you were trying to argue that Germany and Japan, they came out of the ashes of the World War II, but then they had some pre-war industrial experience as the basis, so they could survive as a democracy to promote economy. But you were, I think, trying to argue that South Korea didn't have that. And South Korea was basically an agricultural economy. Taiwan was like that too. But then, on the other hand, as I said, we do not have enough country examples like, for countries that was backward and agricultural economies that survived. But I would like to use, for example, like India as an example, because India is the well-known poor democracy. When they became a democratic country, they were really poor. India, of course, as a democracy, India still have a lot of issues to deal with. For example, they have political democracy, but they still have very rigid social hierarchy and all these gender issues. But then on the other hand, I think I belong, I kind of, sort of like the belief or accept the Nobel Prize laureate, that famous economist Amartya Sen's argument that, if you compare democracy and authoritarianism, the kind of damage that could happen in authoritarianism never really take place in democracy. For example, famine, like a famine, it was not about natural disaster. It had everything to do with the social and political institutions. So if you look at the historical records, that huge number of people could die within a short period of time. You never see that in democracy. So talking about like basics, human survivals and the basic dignities, I think democracy of course is not a perfect. It's far from being perfect, but at least it damages people less.
So this is the left side.
What I want to ask is because as your presentation shows, and I actually wanted to mention Columbus Day as well, is that over the world there's often a lot of people that venerate people that by our standards today are quite horrible. So, for example, we have Columbus. Columbus was not a very great person if we see from what is there. In Russia, on the victory day of World War II, there's still a lot of people that would put flowers on Stalin's grave, even though a lot of people know that Stalin did a lot of horrible stuff. So I want to ask this: why do you think is there maybe like a need for some people to have some hero they can look up to, some national defender or national hero?
Yeah. Probably that's the case. For Columbus, my argument will be, people can still teach about Columbus, or, if they want at a certain part, they could probably still name something after Columbus. But does Columbus need to be a national holiday, like Columbus Day? You see what I mean? Because in terms of the memory or memorialized things, you have all kinds of symbols. And I think these are all come down to democratic struggles. Whose day become national holiday, and who got monument, whose statues remain, be kept or be erected. These are all complicated issues. And I just think for democratic society, the thing I try to do in this paper only is a sort of like a small slice of all these things, because there are all these rituals and all these symbols. And bronze statues is just one of them. So whether people wanted to do like a hero worship, probably that satisfy or meet certain people's needs. But as a country, on the collective level, are we supposed to do that? I think that's a debatable issue.
Julia.
I just wanted to ask what happened when the statues were removed from places where there could other statues in these different countries, or these public places are like, you have the feeling that there has to be some statue or something. Sometimes there is a center and there is something missing when all the statues are removed. So I just wonder.
Some places, I do not have comprehensive knowledge about that, but by some of the literatures, works shown that in some locations when they are removed, they are removed. Yeah, and in some of the locations, when these statues are removed, they were replaced by public art.
Okay, then the next question is here, and you, and then I can.
Yeah, actually, it's more a comment. I think the main problem with transitional justice is that it's transition is a really slow process. For example, Germany, I think, had a really easy process because after there was a really quick regime change after the Second World War, one day, and then the regime changed. So it's really easy to just say, okay, we destroyed everything what's concerning Hitler. But for example, Spain, it's much more difficult because it's very slow. And to then say, okay, then let's destroy everything in 1 second, even if the underlying process is very slow, is kind of harsh for me. So I think it would be better to maybe leave the statues and then reinterpret them. Maybe, for example, Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, you could make a museum out of it, where you say, Chiang Kai-shek killed so and so many people, and he lost the war against Mao Zedong, and you can state all the facts, and then everybody can inform himself and think for themselves what they actually think. And then maybe some people still think he's a hero, and some people not.
Yeah, then it depends on how we do the kind of things you suggested.
Yeah,
because
if you just put up the statue, of course, it's kind of a glorification. But
yes.
if you provide some informative material and say, okay, this is a statue which was established then and under these conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. No, he kind of
You asked your question. Okay.
I'm just wondering, based on some of the discussion that has been going on here, the talk is about transitional justice, but in many sense, it's more retrospective justice, especially based on what we're talking here. And I'm thinking on both sides of the debate, there is an attempt to pose it as kind of like good versus bad. For example, you take Chiang Kai-shek out because he's bad, because now there's good things and there's bad, etc. And that's really just the same nationalization of narrative. You basically narrow down the narrative in a nationalistic way and eliminate all alternative narratives to it. And I'm thinking, for example, in Europe, if you look at the same thing, I don't think many people would object, for example, to have Napoleon statues in France or Bismarck statues in Germany. And let's say if you talk about the Rhodes Scholarship and say, oh, you can't have Rhodes in any, even though you can't have Rhodes in any college and everything because he participated in slavery. As you said, all the elites at the time participated in slavery. It doesn't mean you have to eliminate Thomas Jefferson from American history as well. So there is, I think, an acute problem in posting it as a let's say, transitional justice. In many sense, it's just redirecting a very narrow retrospective justice as a nationalistic narrow narrative, isn't it?
Well, transitional justice was called as retrospective justice before, yeah. So, this term became popular among the literatures, mainly because it was related to we call it transitology, because in political science there were a lot of people research democratic transitions. So you can say it's also retrospective justice, and as I mentioned, whether a certain kind of issues will become the topic of a retrospective justice, it really has something to do with the current significance. Yeah. So when you say Bismarck, there is no living victims of Bismarck in Germany or in France. There is no living victims of Napoleon's rule. So people don't care. If you like to do it, then people probably just talk about should we pay such price? What kind of materials we want to use? Are we sure we want to have these such statues in a public place? Right? The debate will not be as politically involved or as emotionally charged. And for the roads thing, I think it was exactly because it had some reference to the current racial relation in South Africa. So it was the same in all these issues regarding the U.S. Universities. So I think we always say that the past will come to haunt us, mainly because currently we still face that issue. So the retrospective justice, how retrospective that we had to be, it's just like how long, where is the end, and how much earlier we have to trace. I think, history is always subject to some kind of reinterpretation. And if you pay attention to recent publications on Thomas Jefferson, so a lot of the works are talking about, him being very sort of conflicting figures, When he wrote down that famous line on the American Independence Declaration, men are created equal, but he himself was a slave owner.
But I'm just thinking, isn't it important to keep some of these lieux de mémoire, which is basically what they are. So, places where you go in order to remember. Also in order to criticize them. So it's not, if you keep a Bismarck statue on the Bismarckplatz, for example, people don't go there and bye-bye, right? Yes. but you may take your class in history class, you may take them there, and you may actually contextualize why was there a moment when this statue was put up, and why, for example, today we wouldn't anymore, right? Because he won the war against France, and he's responsible for unification of Germany, but that actually had very bad effects. So you can do all kinds of things. And so also Napoleon, this is very interesting. So Beethoven is in awe of Napoleon, writes symphony, right, in his honor, and then when he realizes that he wants to become emperor, then he just basically scratches the dedication. And so these people that are being statued, right, they of course go through phases during their own lives and then also in their afterlives. And I think it's important that not to do. And so I would be totally on the opposite side, in a way, maybe we have to keep a part of the wall, the Berlin Wall. It was good to keep a part of the Berlin Wall and make a memorial out of it in order to deal with that past.
Yes.
Because if the past is just removed, then you cannot deal with it. And so, not to have Apache there in the memorial hall, for example, where he is huge, where you can see, whoa, this is a weight on Taiwanese history that you can only feel to see it rather than it's removed. And so therefore, there may be a reason for keeping some of these things, precisely for what you're saying, precisely for the victims, and not against the victims. So,
but not in the current form, because the current form really could not. It's very, very difficult to create the kind of meanings that you just mentioned, given the current form. I would argue.
Because if you contextualize the form, then you show why this form in this historical moment was created the way that it was created. Same with the Mao movement. Anyway, and you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and also,
right? I think Leonard was first, right?
I just quick comment to that, and also I think because there a lot of them are in public spaces, and then people's use of public spaces are very various. And then I remember it's Zhongzhen Jiniantang, it's a lot of people there, hip hop boys, they're just doing they're skating, and I see that as a way to to make that less authoritarian, and also kind of to ridicule that heaviness of the authoritarian leaders.
Well, for that kind of contextualization and interpretation to take place, then they need to change the contents of the memorial hall to a great degree. Because in the current form, that if you go in there, just like you mentioned, that they don't display all these explanations, and in terms of the exhibitions they have, he was still treated as a national savior, even though Taiwanese seldom go there now. But that was still how he was, memorialized. And so for the public space, of course, it was used in very, very different ways. When people basically treated that area as a park. And then it was meant to be a park anyway, even from the very beginning when that place was created. And then there was another issue about government funding. So I would like to see the kind of new contextualization or new interpretation to take place. And if they did not change that, then I honestly, personally, really could not support this current form of Chiang Kai-shek Memorial. It's very, very difficult.
Leonard.
Yeah, two comments to you. Like I think that yesterday we had the metaphor of the toilets. I think maybe we can apply it here too. Like if you just destruct all the statues, it would be like flushing the toilet, which could be good because you don't see the shit anymore. But if you want to like really know the history, might be better. And then another comment to the statue of South Korea. Actually, if they would have built it like with their arms, I think they would have like shot themselves in the leg. I don't think you say it in English, but that's how we say it in German. Like they cut their own legs because people, at least when I would see it, I would laugh because it looks like a Superman. And it's ridiculous.
It was supposed to mean like a great leader with like a vision.
Yes,
with that.
They all like that.
Yeah, but he was more like he wasn't like that. He was like that. The Korean.
Julia? Yeah, actually, my question was also on that point. Like, I mean, is it not more fruitful to keep those statues where they are and make them like in an artistic way, or to put them in another context? And actually, this is not transitional justice. They just put all the Chiang Kai-shek statues and take it in another park, which actually seems very, very strange to me. Like, have all these statues there and like put them away where they were before, and then you just take it away, but you don't work with this, or you don't process.
But that statue park was actually created right after democratization. And when people, at the initial period of democratization, some people really hated those statues. They really want them to be removed. So that statue park actually was created at the, about 20 years ago. And some people had the idea that, if you want to remove your statues, you can just send them here. And then, so it became a statues park. And at that time, transitional justice was not part of the political vocabularies at all. So it had nothing to do with transitional justice at all. Yeah, it was just one way of, dealing with the past, which I don't think is such a bad idea, to be honest. Because, with that kind of park, if you walk in there, then it has that meaning, like you suddenly realize, oh my goodness, there are all kinds of the statues from the authoritarian past, like people really have all these statues all over the countries. Yeah.
But I find that park actually really eerie because it's still aestheticized. So, if you just pile the statues up, like in Russia, for example, or in Soviet Union, the Stalin statues were just basically actually torn down and destroyed, right? And so they're no longer there. And whereas here, they are actually put in this park and they put, the nice flowers around them and so on and so forth. And so you still have this kind of reverent atmosphere. That I find really eerie, and that I don't find at all transitional justice. I don't know. I want to throw something else on the table. What about in China? you probably know about artists doing, for example, statues of Mao Zedong. They don't have a head, just the trunk. So you only see his, in Zhongshan, actually dressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you only have the trunk, no head. The head is removed.
And
there's
do you
one
know
because
that is Mao?
Sui Jianguo makes all of these, and they're made in series, so it's kind of like an Andy Warhol, you know, in all colors. So they can be pink and then be green. There's no head.
So
But
that
you
is
know
the
it's
new
not. So
artistic expression.
that's a way of also, you know, iconoclasm and destruction, desecration that you were talking about. Or another is the Cheng brothers, who have these golden Mao statues, very huge, sometimes they have breasts, and then they destroy, they actually, in a happening, they hammer on these statues, and out comes in the middle, Lenin or Stalin? So they destroy Mao, and in the head of Mao, in the empty head of Mao, there's nothing inside, but Stalin. And you know, these are really, to me, I mean, this is a way of dealing with this traumatic memory that is much more powerful.
But those were artistic works,
Those are
right?
artistic
Those were
works,
made
yeah.
by artists,
Yeah,
right?
they're made by
So
artists, yeah.
I think it really comes down to, you know, whether there will be artists, you know, who wanted to get involved. So that, you know, goes back to my earlier point. I myself do not have a very specific, fixed idea about what would be the best way to handle all these issues. And from my viewpoint, or some of my friends also shared that perspective, we really wanted the society to open up the discussions. It's like, you know, it's much more healthy for a society to discuss and debate about it, rather than, you know, you have a top-down policy, like remove this one night, over one night, and everything is done. Yeah.
Like, for example, some spaces I could imagine to remove them, because, for example, you want to reuse them to make something different, and it's a public space, and you need the space for something else, and then it's like, I mean, you can't, in the toilet, you can't keep it forever, you have some, you kind of use it again, you know? Maybe I'm a little bit overextended.
So you will never forget that either.
The picture was very strong, I think.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, maybe my question is not so much related to the bronze statues, because I'm just wondering if there is any other factors which is associated with the democratization and the dictatorship. So here comes to my question: does the cultural doctrine, just like the Confucianism, which is existed in all these Asian countries, that helps the dictatorship to control or manage the country, or just help to improve the democratization, or it's just like a barrier that which is stops the step of this democracy?
I think Confucianism definitely doesn't have nothing to do with Taiwan's democratic transition, because it's not a helper. But whether it hinders the democratic transition is another issue. I don't see it plays a role. It doesn't. It was not exactly a helping force and a propelling force, but it was not such an obvious hindrance either. But yes, during the authoritarian time, the authoritarian government did try to create this sort of like a hegemonic ideology based on Confucianism. And I think Confucianism, in a way, if you ask my personal opinion, I hope I'm not offending any Confucianist here, I think it actually is a little bit anti-democratic, you know. Because, you know, it has all these ideas about everybody in the right place. I mean, that's really non-democratic, right? Because in democracy, you know, if we talk about like social contract theory, people are equal, you know, participants to create such a social pact that protect everybody's dignity and freedom. But you know, in Confucianist tradition, you are supposed to listen to your parents. Why should you listen to your parents, especially if you become an adult, right? So,
yeah, okay. Okay. So, any more questions? There is another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got one question about the cult of personality, because the last time I saw this kind of a documentary about the mouse statue, and I think it's very interesting now in China. Some people just endow the mouse statue with kind of religious meaning. I don't know, because
there are people like that in Taiwan, but extremely small number, because there were a Chiang Kai-shek temple created in
front of National Taiwan University
in Taiwan, and there was a small number of people they worship Chiang Kai-shek like they worship, because the Chinese folk religion, especially Taiwanese folk religion, they worship people who were like life figures historically, who were alive. It was not like a Christian God, But for Christian God, you actually have Jesus Christ who was alive as a human flesh, So there were, but it's not popular at all. And the Chiang Kai-shek definitely currently is not a cult figure in Taiwan, not at all. Yeah.
And so those little Chiang Kai-sheks and little Maos and little Madame Jiang that were produced.
These were like the funny souvenirs.
Yeah, very nice souvenirs. So I have them standing on my
Actually, one of Chiang Kai-shek's one of Chiang Kai-shek's great grandson, Jiang Jingbo's grandson, actually has these design companies focus on all these mementos of his grandparents.
Yes.
Yeah.
But who buys them? Just
Chinese tourists. Chinese tourists.
So there wouldn't be, remember that I think it was in January this year that they built this in Henan.
The
famine
huge
area, they built this huge golden
statue.
statue of Mao, and it was businessmen, right? Who gave them money, local businessmen. And then it was torn down.
In 3 days or something.
We don't know. I don't know. I didn't follow the story. But anyway, so in Taiwan, that wouldn't happen. There wouldn't be a grassroots movement building a huge Chiang Kai-shek.
No, I could hardly see that. A few years ago, the grandson of Jiang Jingbo's design company produced a design that has a small, one tiny bullet as a keyring. Okay. And we issued a public statement to criticize that design. But from their original idea, from his grandson's idea, great-grandson's idea, his great-grandfather was a military person, and so the bullet symbolized his great-grandfather's sort of like a military career. And we were like, are you kidding? Your great-grandfather killed a lot of people, killed a lot of innocent people or political dissent. And how could you produce sort of like a souvenir that has like one bullet, like a keyring, like a bullet keyring? So we criticized a lot, and we issued a public statement, and I myself, with another friend, wrote up a piece, and then they stopped doing that. So, yeah.
Okay, they're telling me that we have to stop the film, and that it's 2 minutes to 6, and that the dinner is already out there. And we decided, and some of you may not have heard that the film will start at 6:30, so we're done when the game starts. So that everyone can watch soccer. We can even watch it together if you want. Do a public viewing in the institute. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Professor Huang for this very spirited free talks that kept us awake, even though it was a long day.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And so grab some food and then we'll move whoever wants to fill the